I posted a Twitter poll the other day asking if there's a difference between cults and religions, and I got some interesting responses, so I figured we'd take a look and see if we can find some differences. We'll start by examining a religion that we unequivocally know to be a cult, Heaven's Gate. Let's get into it. For those of you who might not know what Heaven's Gate is, it's a cult from the mid-90s who got famous for having some very bizarre beliefs. Actually, they'd been around since the mid-70s, but they really came into prominence on the night of March 26, 1997, when the San Diego County Sheriff's Department discovered the bodies of the 39 active members in their mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. When they were discovered, they found a $5 bill and 3 quarters in each of their pockets. Why? For space fare. The Hale-Bopp comet was on its way past Earth, and their leader, Marshall Applewhite, who called himself Doe, like the musical note, told them there was a spaceship behind the comet on its way to pick them up. They had armbands on that said Heaven's Gate Away Team, and they believed they were leaving their earthly vessels or their human body vehicles behind. You'd think they'd realize the $5.75 would stay behind in the vehicle's pockets, but I digress. It was a tragedy, and before they quote-unquote went on their away mission, they made farewell videos to their friends and family.
We're going to begin our interviews today with Sorority. How long have you been in this classroom circumstance?
Since Valentine's Day 21 years ago.
Okay, and is there anything in particular you would like to say?
There's so much I want to say to you. Well, just about anything that would be of any significance to you is already on Heaven's Gate. I mean, this is kind of, in one sense, kind of silly. I would really strongly recommend, if you could find Heaven's Gate, the book or the website, go there, study it, read it. It would do you a lot of good.
I watched them all. It was heartbreaking. So how'd these people get to the point where they were so convinced their leader was correct that they'd be willing to take their own lives? Through cult mind control. What makes something a cult? How is it different from other groups? And how do they maintain control over their members? Stephen Hassan, one of the experts in the psychology of cults, wrote something called the bite model. It helps us determine if something is a cult or not, and it can give us a clearer picture of what makes something a cult. There are other models. The bite model isn't the only one out there. There's also the ICSA model, which stands for the International Cultic Studies Association. That one is used in courtrooms, but I feel like it's a little too focused on religious cults and doesn't leave much room for political or psychology cults like QAnon or Scientology. So we're going with the BITE model for this video. The BITE model is an acronym. It stands for Behavior, Information, Thought, and Emotional Control. It has a number of points under each category, but they can all be boiled down to a few key points each. Obviously, the difference between a cult and any other group is control, coercion, undue influence. Here are a few key points under the behavior control section. Promote dependence and obedience, modify behavior with rewards and punishments, and regulate your leisure time, control your clothing and hairstyle, and restrict your sexuality. There are lots of other points on the BITE model, but those are the keys. And this is more of a gradient than a hard rule. If the group does some of this stuff, but not all of it, it doesn't necessarily mean it isn't a cult. It means it isn't as extreme as others. Now, as far as behavior control goes, the overarching point behind these points is behavior modification. The goal is to change somebody's personality to be more in line with what the cult wants it to be, effectively fabricating a new personality and replacing it with what we call the authentic personality. Jehovah's Witnesses even have a term for it. They call it putting on the new personality. They have a number of methods of control. Most of it's done through social isolation because they can't legally imprison you for breaking the rules, which brings us to emotional control, the E in the BITE model. Here are some of the key points in this category. Teach emotion-stopping techniques to prevent sadness when you're ordered to shun people or to prevent homesickness. Shower you with praise and attention when you do something quote-unquote right, aka love bombing. Shun you if you disobey or disbelieve, and instilling irrational fears or phobias of leaving the group, like claiming you're risking your immortal soul if you leave. So we've covered the B and the E, behavior and emotional control. What about thought and information control? Information control, the I in BITE, is primarily about making sure any information they get is from a perspective that'll further the goals and beliefs of the cult. If a documentary comes out that's critical of the group, the leadership will either use propaganda to reframe it and make the documentary producers look evil or disingenuous, or they'll ban their members from watching it at all, or both. In extreme cases like Heaven's Gate, they weren't even allowed to access outside sources of information. They were completely isolated in their mansion together. They never left, and nobody ever came in. They made most of their money by designing websites for people.
And want to let you know that you might need to get someone else to finish up your website right now. And that we might see you all again, and then we might not, but we hope that you remember us as we were, and not how other people are going to try and tell you that we are. And one last thing we'd like to say is 39 to beam up. Thank you.
So obviously some people had access to the internet, but they had clear instructions not to go poking around. Do your job and rejoin the rest of us when you're done. And what a job they did. This is their website from 1996. Pretty good for 1996, right? It wasn't even a GeoCities website. It was full-blown HTML from scratch. They had some real hacker skills back then. Anyways, that was information control. If you can't prevent them from seeing it entirely, make sure you put a spin on everything they consume and feed them information directly. Set up a cult-approved news network, like, say, JW Broadcasting, or Cartoons for Kids. If you want to control them, you have to control the information they take in. It's a necessity. And that brings us to our last category, thought control, the T in the BITE model. This includes things like instilling black versus white, us versus them mentality, teaching them to reject critical thinking, rational analysis, and doubt.
Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith.
And generally teaching them to trust the group above all else. If you control their information, but don't control them emotionally, they'll reach out to speak to a friend to try to figure out what's happening to them. If you control them emotionally, but don't control their behavior, they'll disappear. If you control their information, but not their thoughts, they'll start doubting the information you're feeding them. You have to control all 4 of these aspects of their lives, or you risk losing your grip. And the one thing I like most about the BITE model, though it has its flaws, is that it leaves room for non-religious cults too. Not just Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormonism, like the IXA model, but UFO cults like Heaven's Gate, or psychology cults like Scientology. To those who originally said that they believe religions and cults are synonymous, are you starting to see some differences? There are non-religious cults too. When I debate Trump cultists, one of their favorite insults is to apply religious qualities to things they don't like. They'll say the cult of woke has a god that they worship and religious tenets. Almost like they're using religion as an insult, bizarrely. Religion doesn't have to be, and shouldn't be used as an insult. It doesn't have to be religious in nature to be bad. Political cults exist. Cults of personality exist too. Religions and cults are not synonymous. When I point that out, usually I get people to concede that there are non-religious cults too, but all religions are cults. And I have to say, I completely disagree. By definition, a cult is a group. It can't be a category. It can't be an ideology, and it can't be a movement. It needs some kind of system that enforces behavior modification, information control, emotion control, and thought control, even if those things are self-imposed. An ideology might be a breeding ground for groups that turn into cults, but the ideology itself is not a cult. Christianity and Islam are categories, not groups. If you want to point the finger and call it a cult, you have to get more specific than Christianity. Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormonism, and I'd even be willing to go as far as to say Catholicism are good examples of cults. And I know that's a tall claim, but I do have a defense for that last one. That's for another video. The point is, you can't just go around calling things you don't like religions or cults. And there is a clear difference between religions and cults. Cults use an extreme form of social control to brainwash their victims. Religions are not cults by default. When I bring this up with my mom, who is very clearly a member of the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses, she says everybody influences everybody. Your friend influences you when they ask you if you want to get pizza or see a movie. Jehovah's Witnesses are no different. Is that true? What makes that influence different from cult influence on people? Stephen Hassan, the guy who wrote the BITE model, also wrote something called the influence continuum, which draws a distinction between constructive influence and destructive influence. Take a look. Somebody who's trying to influence you in constructive ways will encourage you to base your decisions on your conscience. Somebody who's destructively influencing you will try to change your conscience to conform to their doctrine. Healthy influence would include encouraging creativity and humor, or free will and critical thinking. Destructive influence encourages fear and guilt, or dependency and obedience. Destructive influence on a leadership level claims absolute authority. Constructive influence is accountable. You should be free to leave when you want, without fear of consequences. I was a member of a club in high school. When I decided to stop going, I wasn't punished for it. The leaders didn't tell everybody else to shun me. They didn't try to convince me I couldn't live without them, or that I was at risk if I left, or any of that. I just walked out the door one day and never came back. That was the end of the story. That's the difference between constructive influence and destructive influence. Cults are all about about control. They want to maintain a tight grip on people's lives at any cost. If there are religions out there that don't fit that mold, then all religions are not cults. Never mind the fact that religion is a category, not a group. If you want to identify cults, then you have to narrow it down and get specific, because with the help of the scientific community, there is an objective answer to be had. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, there's Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check me out on Teespring, or you can check out my Etsy shop. I sell game controller stands for every system from the original Nintendo to the PlayStation 4, so give it a look. You might find something you like. I also sell these signs to keep Jehovah's Witnesses away. They're not afraid of much, but they are scared to death of apostates. So if you want to stop them from knocking on your door, this is a good way to do it. Anyways, give it a look. You might find something you like. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.